Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. I've seen people are starting to come in. Um, Welcome to this webinar of our EDICa seminar series. And I'm going to, like today, we're going to have quite a lot of people joining in, which is really, really good to see. And so I'm just gonna start straight away and then just make some introductions, and then Jemina will start shortly. So today the seminar is about writing an EDI plan, and that's presented by Professor Jemina Napier, who is the Deputy Principal Investigator of the EDI Caucus. And my name is Chiara Cocco, and I'm also part of the caucus, and I work as a research associate. I've been working in this project. So the code of conduct, this is particularly important today because we have quite a lot of people coming in. Really, we want this to be a harassment-free experience for everyone. We do regard respect very highly, so we do not tolerate any harassment in any form. So any participants who violate these rules, sorry, may be sanctioned or expelled. So there is the opportunity to ask questions, etc., but everything needs to be done in very much respectful way for all. In terms of accessibility, you can activate the closed captions by clicking on the three dots at the bottom of your screen, and then selecting the closed caption option. For this particular event, live, the BSL interpretation has not been requested, but it will be added to the video later, and when it's going to be uploaded on our website. So as I said before, there's the Q&A function, so you can type a question. You can do that anonymously. Jemina, if you can just pass on to the other slide, please. You can do that anonymously, or you can write your name. Because of like the number of people and the number of questions that we might receive, you have the opportunity to upvote a question if you really want that to be addressed. Time might be limited, so we will prioritize those with the most votes. However, we will collate all the questions and have a document with question and answers that will be circulated later on. As I said before, the chat also has been enabled, so there'll be opportunity for the attendees to exchange and comment. However, again, we highlight that it needs to be respectful, and for those who do not respect this privilege, that will be removed. Jemina will talk for about 35 minutes, and then we're going to have the Q&A. I'll just quickly introduce the Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Caucus, because some of you might be already familiar with it, some others might not. But the Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Caucus is an initiative, a project funded by the UKRI with the British Academy, and it is aimed to research evidence base for inclusive careers across the UK research and innovation ecosystem. And if our objectives are multifarious, so yes, exactly. Thanks, Jemina. So we do research. We very much evidence-based, and we want to create an evidence base for inclusive research careers across the UK research and innovation ecosystem. We aim to remove, through this research, we aim to remove barriers experienced by normally marginalized groups and support them to not just access the careers, but also thrive within them. We do conduct an interdisciplinary research. We are a very interdisciplinary group coming from different backgrounds of also marginalization, but also different disciplines. And we also aim at creating a national and international communities of practice that then can take the sort of like legacy of this work outside there and in their own institutions and organizations as well. And a key element of our project and our ethos is using a co-design approach with stakeholders and also with people with lived experience. You can also have a look at our website that Fenella, our senior officer here, support officer, has put on the chat. And this is the last one for the year, the last seminar of what has been a very successful seminar series on research methods. And this series was aimed at equipping researchers and practitioners with tools, frameworks, and various and different approaches that are necessary to critically analyze and specifically address EDI issues across various realms. So the previous seminars that we conducted as part of this series have been around inclusive science communication, but also using AI to transform EDI research, which is another very current topic, but also social network analysis. One of the latest one was a literary review and Black women academics experience. And the last one was a couple of weeks ago, was the co-production in the context of neurodiversity. All of these seminars have been recorded and they can be found in our website. So today, as I said, we will focus on writing an equality, diversity, and inclusion plan. And I've already introduced her, but again, Professor Jemina Napier will deliver this talk, and she's the chair of intercultural communication here at Heriot-Watt University. She's also the deputy principal investigator of EDICa, the EDI Caucus, and she's associate director, supervisor engagement at the Scottish Graduate School of Social Sciences. So Jemina, take it with you.
Thanks, Chiara. Thanks for chairing today and for the introduction and the overview of EDI, the EDI Caucus and the webinar series that we've had, and also introducing me today. As Chiara said, we are a multidisciplinary group. We are a mixed group. And so my background, I'm a chair of intercultural communication. And so I have worked very closely for many, many years with deaf communities worldwide, but here in the UK with deaf people that use British Sign Language. And so my expertise is very much about working with language minorities, so deaf people being a case in point, but with language minorities generally. And as Chiara said, we each bring something very different. We have expertise in working in research with disabled people, with neurodiverse people, across gender, race, and so on. So we all bring different perspectives. So my role in the EDI Caucus as the deputy principal has been primarily is the EDI champion, which means to look at embedding EDI principles and practices in everything that we do as a caucus, but also in everything that we support others to do as well. So right from the very get-go, we've always had accessibility at the forefront of what we do. So this is an example where with our own website, we have British Sign Language accessibility, because that's something that I could bring with my background. So Chiara just went through the 5 key objectives of the caucus with you. And when we launched the website, we actually produced a British Sign Language version initially for the first 3 objectives, which, because it's an iterative project which is organically kind of grown and been shaped. We now have 5 objectives. And as Chiara mentioned, all of our webinars have BSL interpretation either live, if it's requested by deaf participants, or we add BSL interpretation in Vision in the videos when they're made available through the website. So this is just a really straightforward example that people often don't think about, and we've embedded in our own Caucus project. So one of the reasons why we decided to offer this webinar is because my experience in working with the Caucus and thinking about how we can embed EDI, we've now seen translated into funders' requirements. So many funders actually are requiring grant proposals to include some kind of EDI plan or acknowledgement of how EDI considerations have been factored in to projects. So we thought that this would be a good way to actually share our learning within our own project, because the Caucus, we are conducting our own research, we are engaging with researchers. So we have actually developed our own EDI plan, and that's primarily what we're going to be sharing with you today. And then hopefully for you to take some sort of food for thought away from the webinar today about how you might develop your own EDI plans for your own either grant proposals or projects that you might already have in place. I know, for example, at Heriot-Watt University, where we are based as the EDI Caucus primarily, some of the internal grants that are being run. So we have a research culture enhancement fund that people can apply for activities to foster research culture within the institution. And if you apply for that fund, you have to include an EDI plan as well in that. So we're actually starting to see these kinds of requirements at lots of levels, institutionally and from funders. So I'm going to just go through a few tips sort of from my learning. I wrote the EDI plan for the EDI Caucus, which wrote the draft of it, and which we then discussed as a team and developed further. So using my experience of developing an EDI plan for the Caucus, I'm just going to go through some key areas, if you like, that we'd like to share with you from our learning. So if you're thinking about an EDI plan, of course, the most obvious thing to do is think about who the research team is. And you can include EDI expertise in the team, not only in terms of who the researchers are, by ensuring that you have sort of representation in a team, depending on what you're focusing on. We are primarily a qualitative research team. We do have some quants research happening. So much of the research we're doing and people in social science are doing are focusing around qualitative measures. But so I might be giving you tips that and depending on your disciplinary background, you might be thinking, well, how does that apply to me if I'm working in a lab? So I'm trying to take those kind of things into consideration. But a lot of the examples I'm giving you are from doing kind of more qualitative studies. So you can think about the research team, depending on the, so as I just said, EDICa is a very mixed team. So because we are exploring EDI characteristics and barriers in the research and innovation system, our PI, Kate Sang, brought together a team of researchers who also brought a wide range of representation of different EDI characteristics. And we've worked with various consultants. We have an advisory group. But for you, if you're thinking about an advisory group, I think one point to remind people of is that if somebody identifies as having an EDI characteristic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have EDI expertise. And we hear lots of stories. We had a seminar just a couple of weeks ago of Black women academics who often get asked to be what they feel is like the token person on the job interview panel or the token person on the advisory board, because that ticks a box for people to say, oh, we therefore have diversity. So you have to think about that very carefully, about who you're actually thinking about contacting and recruiting, whether that's into the team, into any consultants you employ. I, for example, am working with deaf communities. When I'm outsourcing to consultants, whether it could be even for web page development, it could be for photography, for development of resources, I often will try and source deaf led companies or deaf people themselves, suppliers themselves, because it's a way to engaging with the community. So there are different ways that you can go about that, but just try to make sure that you're thinking that through carefully. And then once you brought your research team together or your advisory board together, you're actually providing them with regular training, or that they understand what the requirements are, or what the expectations are with regards to EDI, and having those EDI discussions. So making sure that you're embedding those principles and practices and the ideology within everything that you do in a project. You can also consider EDI elements when you're running the project. So, and we'll make these slides available to everybody who's joined us today, by the way, so you don't have to worry about taking lots of notes. But when we think about inclusive research practices, this essentially means we want to encourage you to think about what does your team need to do the research optimally, whether you're in a lab, whether you're in an office. This could be with regards to schedules, how you work together as a team. And it could also be, a lot of people think about equipment, accommodations as being around equipment. But it could be bringing in British Sign Language interpreters or captioners, note takers. But it can also be things, sort of less tangible things like when do we agree to have our meetings? Do we have them online? Do we have them in person? At what days do we have them on? Which time of the day do we have them on? Especially if you're trying to account for disabled people, people with chronic illnesses, neurodiversity, people with caring responsibilities, people who observe different faiths. So nowadays, I think, especially post-COVID, we have a lot more flexibility in our approach to work. So things like actively thinking about, well, do we allow people to work from home and when and how often? Flexibility in the working day, starting and finishing later. Or earlier if need be, so it can accommodate caring responsibilities, not just for children. It can also be caring responsibilities for other people with who are elderly or disabled people in your family. And thinking about whether meetings have to be in person. If they could be online, it might make it easier for people to join. And thinking about meeting etiquette too. So nowadays we know that more and more meetings are online, and this is not just about research projects. This is just working in the research ecosystem generally. Thinking about meeting etiquette. How do you ensure turn taking is smooth? How do people communicate? Do they have to have their camera on? Could they use the chat function? Because not everybody feels comfortable to be able to respond instantly. Do you give people time to consider what they would like to say and reflect on what they would like to say before having to jump in? So thinking about all the different needs that people have. And if you're a lead, I'm really speaking to those of you who might be PIs or thinking about being PIs. It's about taking responsibility for access requirements. So making sure that everybody has a say in what they need. So you're not making assumptions about what other people need and making decisions, but you can also take that load because quite often it's the people that need accommodations or have barriers to overcome that are often the ones that are actively fighting or pushing or having to think about what they need. Whereas if you can take some of that load off them, then that can be a big help. So again, a good example is that we have an in-house interpreter coordinator at Heriot-Watt University who will organise all the BSL interpreting requirements for all of our academic staff and researchers and PhD students, so that they don't have to do it. So they don't have that additional load on them on top of all the teaching and research and everything else that they're having to do. So I think the key here is that people who identify with EDI characteristics might not adhere to sort of normative working practices. When we think about the way that universities run, typically, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 is the expectation, but not everybody can follow that. It doesn't mean they can be any less productive. So the idea would be, don't make any assumptions, ask people what they need, what they would like, offer them mentoring and support. And so, which we also have in the EDI Caucus, and we have various support mechanisms, buddy systems and mentoring that we have for the whole team. So where we can also think about EDI elements is in organising data collection and also events as part of your projects. So it can be things even as straightforward as thinking about having accessible venues that are easy to reach by public transport, that have accessible parking nearby, and actually communicating that very clearly. Pre-booking BSL interpreters and advertising that they will be present. So don't necessarily always wait for them to be requested. So we always advertise that we have BSL interpreters on standby and that people can let us know whether they're attending, and if then nobody confirms, then we don't need to have the interpreters necessarily, but we always plan it in advance. Communications about the project, so in English, but also in plain English. We obviously use British Sign Language, but you can make communication about the project or events you're organising or data collection, recruitment, participant recruitment. You can actually make all this information available in different formats. One of the things that we have tried to factor in is the costs of caring responsibilities if someone needs to make paid arrangements in order to be able to participate. So we have a symposium coming up, for example, which we've factored that into. That's something that, again, obviously it has implications on budget. Some of this stuff does cost money. It's not just thinking through what's nice to do, but it's also what's practicable that you can do within a budget. So you could, for example, say, well, we will ring fence a proportion of money for a certain event in order to allow people with caring responsibilities either to bring their child with them if they need to pay for a carer to come with them, or to put their child into daycare or something for an extra day, as an example. Likewise, one of the things we try to do is take into account that researchers in the UK research and innovation system, many people are on precarious contracts, they're on casual contracts, they might only get paid, have a job during semester time. So if people have to take time off work, or people are on a low income, if they're PhD students, and they're being asked to attend events or participate in research, is there any way you can mitigate the costs for them, either by covering their travel costs or some other way of meaning that they're not going to be out of pocket by being able to participate in your research project. Further to that, we really strongly recommend that you do consult interfaith calendars to avoid any religious holidays, because we do tend to be very much our work schedule is very premised around the Christian calendar, but we know many colleagues who don't observe the Christian faith, and so therefore there might be other days or weeks in the calendar where they would like to take time off so they can observe their own faith. So don't book things in on dates where it might make people feel bad that they can't come, or that they come and then they feel conflicted or don't feel very comfortable. Kind of aligning with the idea of flexibility in the working day for the research team, as I mentioned earlier on. Consider offering events, focus groups, training, anything that you're doing with respect to your research at different times of the day, so that you can provide options. So again, it's people that have caring responsibilities or health needs. People might have to do the school run. They might have certain medical regimes that they have to follow first thing in the morning or in the evening. So typically we would say avoid early starts and late finishes and peak travel times. But if you're doing things online, one of the things I've found is quite often doing early or late, later. So early as I mean like 9 a.m. and later start as like 4 p.m. often seems to work well, in that people feel like they can still do their work day. They can still focus on what they need to do during the day, but they kind of start an hour later or they finish an hour earlier, but they can still get ahead with what they need to do during the day. So that seems to work quite well for us. And lunchtime sessions like this one are also good. We will now typically provide all vegetarian and vegan catering, and including gluten and lactose-free options. One of the reasons we do this is because if you offer all vegetarian, basically meat eaters and fish eaters can eat vegetarian, but as soon as you provide meat options, I've been in a situation once where I am vegetarian mostly, and been in a situation where they did provide a few vegetarian options. It was all meat, a few vegetarian options, but there were a lot more vegetarians there than was available food, and all the vegetarian food went really quickly. And another situation I've been in is they've had meat sandwiches and vegetarian sandwiches all stacked one on top of the other, which obviously doesn't bode particularly well. So if you provide all vegetarian, it actually seems like a really simple idea, but it's actually a very effective idea, and everyone usually seems very pleased with it. I've already mentioned having a gender, race, ethnicity balance in the research team, but also thinking about how that you're sampling participants, so how you're approaching people, recruiting people to be involved in your studies. And if you need to have EDI representation and you have an EDI representation within your research team, then we do know that people feel comfortable being approached by someone that they can relate to, that they can connect with. So whether that's based on gender, race, disability, any other characteristics, that there's a kind of element of trust there if people feel that they can relate to who they're being approached by to participate, and they're maybe more likely to say yes to participate. So we have kind of followed all of those principles in our own project in the caucus, and we wrote our own EDI plan. And what we've also done is required as part of the caucus, when we asked people to apply for our flexible fund, we've run 3 rounds of the flexible fund, and we actually have one part of that which states that people have to include an EDI plan as part of their application, and it has to set out how applicants will include EDI considerations in all aspects of their project. So how they recruit their team, like who's involved in the team, how they're implementing co-design, how they're training team members, how they're going to disseminate the findings. That's one thing I didn't mention, was the dissemination. And again, thinking about if there are different languages you need to use, the different formats you need to use, what approaches are you using to disseminate your research findings. And this is the evaluation criteria that we use to evaluate the EDI plans that are written for our flexible fund applications. And we've always said to people that if anybody ever has any questions about the flexible fund and writing the EDI plan and so on, that they could ask us questions if they weren't sure what to include. And we did see that that helped when we were able to give feedback in that process. So I'm just going to go over with you what our EDI plan looks like. So like I said, it incorporates a lot of the core principles and practices that I've already mentioned. Just keeping my eye on the time. So as I mentioned, we seek to embed EDI in everything that we do, in all aspects of our work, because we believe that by fostering a diverse and inclusive research environment, this is actually really important. So it's not just about the research that we're doing, but it's actually about us as a team, but also creating an inclusive and diverse research environment that fosters that sense of belonging amongst the team and anybody else who comes into contact with us as a team. So by having our own EDI plan, it means that we're kind of practicing what we preach, essentially. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want all caucus members to feel respected, valued, and have equal opportunities to contribute and succeed to the project. This is quite dense, this text. So I'm just going to go over kind of the headlines, and as I said, you'll receive the slides afterwards. So we've embedded 5 core values in our EDI plan. So respect and dignity, equal opportunities, collaboration, transparency, and accountability. And I think the accountability one is really critical, because that means that everybody has a responsibility then to uphold the values of the project and to take responsibility for fostering an inclusive research environment and embedding EDI in everything that we do. So we have an advisory stakeholder engagement and an advisory board, and we have different stakeholder groups. We have equity champions who all have a critical role in making sure that us as a research team are accountable, but also that we as a team are accountable to one another. So in our EDI plan, we've set out core actions. So one is around recruitment and retention, and how we will make sure that all research group recruitment promotes diversity. So we do actively seek out candidates from underrepresented groups to work with us. And as I said, that's how we've ended up with the team that we have. Our practices have focused on skills, qualification, and potential relative to opportunity. So we've moved away, and because we've signed up as a university to DORA Concordat, so responsible research evaluation, means that we're moving away from these quantitative metrics and looking much more holistically, sort of a whole person approach around who we work with and how we work. And as I mentioned earlier, we offer mentoring and support for all staff so that everybody can achieve their full potential, and we want to support people on their career pathways and progression. We offer EDI training to all caucus members and also to flexible fund applicants. We provided training to our equity champions. And so we've explored a whole range of different topics, such as inclusive communication, cultural competence, and we we have regular meetings to check in with each other on our progress, but also to identify where training is needed and where support is needed. And so we also organise, these webinars, we organise workshops, seminars and conferences, not only based on our research evidence, but to promote EDI research and in research careers for the wider community. We have established our inclusive research practices by writing clear guidelines and policies. We actually developed, for example, co-authoring guidelines, how we acknowledge each other in everything that we do. And as I mentioned earlier, we've implemented flexible working arrangements. So we have various members of staff working all over Scotland, actually. Not everybody is based here in Edinburgh. So we have lots of flexibility about the way that we work. And also we've tried to incorporate flexibility into our flexible fund. For example, around timelines, giving feedback, supporting people through the receiving of the funds and also their own management of the projects and delivery of their projects. So trying to be as accommodating as possible to people that have either applied for or received flexible fund money. Through communication and engagement, we foster open and inclusive communication wherever we can. So we do communicate regularly about our caucus progress, goals, achievements, and this is about building trust not only within the team, but also with all of our stakeholders, with the people that we engage with, our research participants, our partners, and also the people that receive flexible fund money. But we do have a zero tolerance policy to bullying and harassment. So as Chiara outlined at the beginning, we have a code of conduct for all of our webinars, and this code of conduct also applies in the way that we behave in meetings in our own team and how we support each other to be as inclusive and to for everyone to be able to engage as much as possible. Number 5 is partnership and collaboration. So we have reached out throughout the caucus and to work with lots of different partner organisations who share the caucus commitment to EDI. And so we work collaboratively in partnership to promote EDI in the wider research community and ecosystem. So we're working with lots of different organisations as test sites, for example, to test out some of the resources and interventions that we've been developing. And we also have given advice. So we've been approached by lots of other organisations or individuals who either are looking to seek out sort of kind of equivalent funding to the EDI Caucus. So EDI projects or networks in the research space through different funding councils. So we have provided a lot of advice. Sometimes we end up collaborating with them, but sometimes we give them advice about what we've learned through our own process in order to foster a much broader range of perspectives and expertise and diverse research teams across the whole sector. And also embedded in our action plan is an approach to monitoring and evaluation. So as I mentioned earlier on, we have myself as the EDI champion. So my responsibility is to oversee the implementation of our action plan and review progress regularly and just to monitor that we are embedding EDI in everything that we do. We do collect anonymous demographic data to try and understand who participates. So we're trying to monitor how effective we are being in reaching out to the community and involving underrepresented groups in particular. Things like having surveys and feedback sessions after workshops, training events, webinars, and making adjustments on a regular basis, and then benchmarking our progress. So it's a constant iterative cycle. So that's it from me in sharing with you what we have done. I think we're we're on track time-wise. So this is what I've presented today. Certainly is not a magic wand necessarily, and it doesn't necessarily mean this is a one-size-fits-all model for everybody. What we're hoping by sharing what we've learned on the way, like we've developed our own EDI plan within the caucus, but we have learned lots of things along the way, like we're organising our own symposium coming up, and we'll share the details at the end of the presentation. And how we work as a team, and we have learned along the way. So this is why we wanted to share this through this webinar with you. So now it's over to you for questions and comments, and we're interested also to know from you, like, have you written your own EDI plans? Is there anything else that you would include that we haven't touched on? perhaps you could reflect on what, if you're going for a bid, what you might include, or anything that you're struggling with. What do you think might be most relevant to you in your research context, and how you think your bid or your work could be as inclusive as possible, and what the challenges potentially could be. So I'm going to hand back to Chiara, who's going to chair the Q&A session, and I can see we've got quite a few comments in the chat, so we'll take it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Jemina, for all this helpful information that I think from what's going on in the chat has been received as very helpful indeed. And we've got, yes, a few questions, and I think we can endeavor to answer them all. Hopefully, I think Fenella is responding to Sarah, but one question is asking if we can have some more examples or case studies on the kind of, I think, actual processes and operational elements to embed EDI consideration across the whole research journey. So like number of people who are involved, or funding and technological requirements. Do you have anything in particular, Jemina?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's going to be really hard for me to suddenly come up with a case study off the top of my head, because I think there are so many different examples when we think about different disciplines. But so I know, to give you some examples, some of the applications we've seen through the flexible fund, we've had, like I said, 3 rounds of flexible funding, and we would often go back to applicants when we saw their EDI plans and ask them to consider including other things. So quite often people said things like, oh, we're going to produce, a large text print format of our research report, and we would say things like, well, you could take that a little bit further. So how else can you make it accessible? Is it only going to be available in one format? There are different formats you can make it available in, online and in hard copy. You can make it available in BSL. You can produce a video with captions. So trying to get people to think a little bit outside the box is, I think, one of the key things. And you can't accommodate for everybody, and it's really difficult to budget, especially if you're applying for funding. We all know funding is limited. And so as soon as you start to take into trying to embed accommodation costs, you're thinking, well, how far do I go, right? So if I was to include technology, transport, caring, accessibility through BSL, all of these different things, it all adds up. And so you have to think about what you need to prioritize for your project so that you can actually still do your research, but you want to be as inclusive as possible. And I think that my recommendation would be to think about what your research is about, who's doing the research, and who you want to recruit into the research, because they're going to be the critical elements. I think for people who are doing maybe very lab-based work and not doing research with people, have slightly different criteria. Maybe we'll be focusing more on the team and the way that the team works, as opposed to who you're recruiting to be involved in a project. So all of that is going to need to be taken into consideration. So it's kind of, but I think it's a good point though. Maybe what we could do, we know that we are looking at evaluating our flexible fund. So I think it might be a nice idea to actually draw some case studies out of the different kinds of applications we had to showcase what an EDI plan can look like for different kinds of projects. So thank you for asking that question, because I'll take that away actually back to the team. I think that's something that we could look into.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Jemina. We've got more questions coming in. Actually, 2 are kind of connected, so I'm kind of going to read them together. One is about if you have any advice on if you actually are facing team members that disagree with EDI principles and don't adhere to them, but also on how this kind of EDI plans or zero tolerance policy, they're just kind of tick box exercise. They'll be defined often just words on paper that then are not monitored, like its effectiveness is not monitored. So is there a way that you do that? So you make sure that they are followed through, basically, they're respected by the team and they are also effective?
I mean, that's a really good question. And I think I'm very happy to say that I'm very fortunate because obviously I'm working in the EDI Caucus that we are, or, we are honouring those principles. But we have, because I think we have embedded accountability, because we have an action plan, we've embedded accountability throughout the caucus and throughout the whole team. And ultimately, it's my responsibility as the EDI champion to hold people accountable to it. So I've never observed anybody that contravenes or disagrees with our EDI principles and doesn't adhere to it. So I've never had to challenge anyone, but that is my role in the group, in the team. And the first thing I would do would be to go to the PI, Kate Sang, in the first instance, if I had any concerns. But then we would take it to the team and we would talk it through. So I think that ultimately there does need to be somebody who's accountable. So it's about getting, you can almost think of it almost like a manifesto. So if you're bringing your team together, getting everyone to sign up to it and agree to it, and then also holding each other accountable. If you don't have somebody who doesn't agree, I don't know, would you really want to be working with that person anyway? It would be my response. But, maybe you don't have that choice, especially if you're a postdoc and it's a PI that's employed you, and therefore, you have to weigh up your values with, I have a job and I need to keep this job. So I think that's, it's not an easy question to answer, to be honest, but I think accountability is really the way to go, making sure there's accountability.
Thank you, Jemina. Taking one from down, more questions are coming in now. I'm not sure that we're going to manage to have them all, but when Fiona is asking, when writing EDI plans for funding bids, I find that everything that I write is quite generic, as I usually haven't yet recruited anyone to know what kind of adjustments they will need. And is it sufficient to say that I will consider representation and recruitment and will ensure recruited staff have the opportunity to discuss adjustments on an ongoing basis? Or from your own experience, do funders need something a bit more specific?
I think that's a really excellent question. And I think you're absolutely right, because you're not necessarily going to know. So in my case, quite often, if I'm applying for funding, I will be very specific and say, wherever possible, I try and recruit deaf researchers or bilingual researchers, so people who can engage directly with the deaf community. So I'll be really specific about that because I know that's what I'm looking for. But I also would, try and support people with other intersectional characteristics as well. But that would be my focus. So I think for some projects, you might be able to say, again, just to use the example of the Black deaf women academics, Black women academics, a couple of weeks ago, the webinar. This was a group who got funding, and they were, so of course they were looking to recruit to work with the team, as well as their participants. They could be really specific of what they were looking for because of the nature of the project. But if you're not able to do that, I think it is enough to be general. But I think the important thing is that you've acknowledged it. You're acknowledging it and saying, I'm aware of the fact that I will need to make adjustments. And you could even include one or two examples. So for example, if I recruit a neurodiverse, an employee that has neurodiversity, that we will then discuss accommodations for them once they start work. So you could give a couple of examples like that, but even just acknowledging it, I think, is really powerful.
Thanks, Jemina. And somebody is actually asking if you have any particular tips for early career researchers applying for a fellowship, or if what you've been saying up until now is relatable to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because effectively, I suppose if you're an early career researcher applying for a postdoctoral fellowship, you're effectively your own PI. So you're still having to think about your project. And even if you're going to be the only, lone researcher, you're still thinking about who you're recruiting into your project as participants, who you want to collaborate with. So you might be, if you're thinking about engagement and impact, so which organizations do you want to collaborate with, and where are you going to reach out to communities to create the most impact? So it's not only kind of, we're fortunate in the EDI Caucus is that we have a big team. We have several, the PI, myself as deputy PI, we have several co-Is, we have several postdoctoral researchers, and other research support staff. We have Fenella as the senior officer, and also Lizzie, our project manager, and we have a finance manager. So we're a big team. But all of these principles apply even if you're one person on a project. I mean, if you get £10,000 to do from the Royal Society of Edinburgh to do a small qualitative project, all of these principles still apply in how you're conducting the research and how you're engaging with the wider community and engaging with your research participants.
Thank you. We've got a very voted question. What I don't know if we're able to answer it now, or it'll be better to probably have it in the document that we're going to prepare with the other answers as well. All the questions that we're not managing to do today. Jane is asking. Is it Jane? Sorry. No, sorry. I'm losing it. It's just going. Yes, it's Jane. Can you suggest any good external EDI training courses for researchers? And if you don't have any on the top of your head, probably this is one of those questions where we can actually do some research and probably put it in there.
I mean, I think that there are some out there and we could pull some together for you, but also our website is also going to be a really good starting point. We are developing what we're calling EDICa, which is the EDICa, like a resource hub, where we are pointing to web-based resources, training resources, toolkits, guidelines, and training resources as well. So that's always a good starting point. But there is actually, we're starting to see more and more training emerging. Quite a lot of universities are offering some kind of EDI training, not necessarily specific for researchers, but more broadly. I know at Heriot-Watt, we now have an associate executive dean for EDI in each of our schools, each of our faculties, who run webinar series or seminar series around EDI. So I think it depends on what institution you're in and where you are, but there's quite a lot out there actually.
Great, thank you. Any common mistakes or weaknesses you see when reading EDI plans or statement? Something that you really don't like? That is some red flags.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Jane is someone I've worked with a lot on writing research proposals, actually, and supporting me to write research proposals, and is excellent at that. And I think that I've probably learned from my own mistakes, but I think again, if I reflect on what we've seen with the flexible fund, I think people the weaknesses I think we would see is that people, like I said earlier on, don't think broadly enough. When people think about EDI, I think historically, especially because we have the Athena Swan Charter, people have historically focused on gender and race and ethnicity. But when we think about EDI, it is much broader than that. And so again, it goes back to what's the purpose, what is your project for? Who are you targeting as a research team? Who are you targeting as participants? Who you want to, to include in that project. So it's thinking that through really carefully, because I think that sometimes it's very easy to pick on one or two typical things, but you can actually be a bit more clever and be a bit more nuanced about that.
Thanks. Another question is about how to deal with word count. So how to be thorough and specific, or thorough, but dealing with a limited word count on an application.
Sorry, can you say that again, Chiara?
Sorry. Can you give any advice on writing thorough EDI plans within limited word count sections of an application?
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge. I mean, my approach is that I write everything I want to say, and then I just go through and edit it, and then kick myself many times when I realize I'm still like 5 words over the word count. But I think it's really important to try and include as much as you want to say, or to be as inclusive as possible, to think that through and really put everything down on paper, and then just to refine it as much as you can. And it might be that you reduce down to bullet points and things like that. And it goes back to the earlier comment about, well, how specific do you need to be? Can you be general and can you acknowledge? But you don't want to be too vague. So it's trying to find a balance in there somewhere. And I think that's a challenge with all grant applications, regardless. Every section of a grant application is challenging because there's a word count limit.
Thanks, Jemina. And here we've got like a follow-up in a sense, and still about like the level of detail or not, but more with relation to privacy and sensitivity. So somebody's asking, I'm reflecting on writing EDI plans within research grant applications and wondering if you have any advice on what level of detail would you advise around including demographics of the research team or others involved, engaged throughout the research? And do you have any advice about collecting and sharing these demographics in a sensitive way within plans?
That's a really good question. I think you're right. We have to be sensitive to what people are willing to disclose and have shared. So it's all, you might say, okay, I'm really keen to see representation in my team. Um, there'll be certain elements that you want to disclose. Like if you're talking about the team's positionalities in their research and how it gives the research integrity because you've got a representative team. So sometimes it's good to better talk about that and say, this is who we are, this is what we bring. So like we do with the caucus, we always acknowledge that we all bring something from these kind of very diverse backgrounds. But how you share that data and who you share it with, I think, is a sensitive issue that you need to talk to people who are involved about what they're willing to share, because you might know, for example, that a colleague of yours has a disability or identifies as a disabled person, but they might be comfortable for you to know that, but not necessarily for other people to know that. So I think that's about having conversations and building trust within teams. So if you're talking about writing an EDI plan in an application, I think it would be you would need to be careful, but you could say that you'll be striving to include a representative, representation of different people in the team, unless you wanted to be absolutely specific in the application, because you can be. I think it's just again finding that balance.
And continuing on this line about the sensitivity, there's another question that probably, you could talk to, and is, do you have any good resources for working with individuals that are experiencing poverty or money struggles? This again is a really sensitive topic, and it's not always appropriate to ask people to be involved based on that or provide information and talk about their experiences.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can't think of any specific resources off the top of my head, but I think it's interesting. I was just liaising with a student recently about a similar sort of topic. So I think it's good to be mindful of things like bursaries or hardship funds, or things that are available. Like I mentioned earlier that in the caucus we have budgeted specifically to pay for people to come to our symposium, especially if they've been involved in the research in some ways, where we tried to see if we could cover costs for people to travel if they're on a low income or they're no longer on a research contract. So we've kind of effectively kind of ring fence money for a bursary, if you like. So I think trying to be aware of those things, but I think it really varies depending on, again, what institution you're in and what career stage somebody's in and what kind of contract they might be on. So it really varies. But in terms of participants, I think our core principle is always that no one should ever be out of pocket. I personally follow the NIHR Involve guidelines, and they were actually developed for PPIE, so working particularly with patients and public involvement and engagement in research. But they have really clear guidelines about how much you should pay people, when you should pay them, what you can expect them to do, and for how, so if you're getting somebody in for a 1 hour focus group as opposed to participating in a 1 day co-design workshop, they're very different expectations. And so they have a really good set of guidelines, I think, that I have found really useful, that I would recommend to you.
Perhaps we can share those when we collate that document. And since you mentioned PPIE, actually there's a question about that, and it is about power balance. So you touched on something important with the PI/postdoc example, which also applies to PPIE and other relationship with external partners. Do you have any tips for inclusivity with and around actual or perceived power imbalances in the research?
Yeah, I think that's really important because a lot of funders now, especially funders in relation to any health kind of related research, require a PPIE component. So, and it has to be authentic, like it has to be really authentic, so that people are genuinely involved either in co-designing, crafting, shaping the project, but also evaluating, monitoring progress with their involvement all the way through. So typically, you know, when we think, again, it's about that sort of, is it an individual project? Is it a large project that has a PI? I mean, or even a smaller project that has a PI with a team? But I think ultimately, I would recommend, you know, conversations are always good. Like I'm a PI and have been a PI in lots of different projects, and I have a lot of experience applying for and managing research grants. But every project I go into, I always start by saying I'm here to learn from you, you know, and we're here to learn together. So when we have an advisory group, whether we have a PPI engagement group, it's about us kind of starting out building trust right from the very beginning. And I think that really helps to offset the power dynamics, because I have had people say to me, oh, you know, you're a professor. I'm like, yeah, but yes, that's just a title, because that to show that how long I've been an academic for, really. But you know, ultimately, we have the same goals with working together on this project, and let's use that as a starting point. It doesn't necessarily remove all the power dynamics, but I think it can help to alleviate, or at least acknowledge, recognize them, and then move past them in some ways.
Thank you, Jemina. I think we're gonna say the last question from Lindsay that is very interesting is that one of the biggest challenges seems to be that funding calls often seem to phrase their EDI requirements in a way that requires the grant holder to solve all EDI ills. We operate within a complex sector with deep-rooted EDI issues that will not be solved by one project. Do you have any advice on how to ensure realistic goals and activities are set that still satisfy funder requirements?
That's a great question, Lindsay. I would have expected a question like that from you. And thanks somebody else. I also was in a meeting earlier with today. That's a really great question. I think it is about recognizing limitations. You're absolutely right, because, and you know, it kind of goes in line with the earlier question about word count limitations. Like, how much can you actually say about what you're going to do, but also how much can you actually do? And so I think that when you're writing EDI plans or thinking about how to embed EDI, it's also about being realistic and about what is feasible within the scope of your project. So I'm running a 1-year project at the moment around domestic abuse, which is in deaf communities, which is separate to the EDI Caucus. And so we've had to really think carefully about how often we can meet, who's meeting together, having, you know, how much can we, you know, we have to have BSL interpreters every single time we meet, because we have a mixed deaf hearing group with a range of different expertise. So the more times we meet, that means more interpreters, interpreting costs. So even just like kind of really practical considerations like that. So I think that it's about thinking about what is practical and actually outlining that. And if I'm not, you know, you're not trying to do blue sky, you're not trying to change the world. It has to be, you know, one project at a time. And I think it's being about being realistic about that in your applications.
Okay, we are nearly at 2 p.m. So we will endeavor to answer the questions that are left here and address all the if there's any other questions in the chat, but I want to thanks Jemina Napier for this great presentation, very useful tips, and also answering all those questions as well. And in terms of, if you can change the slide, Jemina, yeah, I just want to remind you that there's a couple of events. So we're hosting our symposium, the project symposium on the 20th of November, so you can register for online participation. And then we have a lecture on Black History Month, and lecture on Scottish University links with African enslavement and colonialism held by Dr. Simon Buck, and that's on the 22nd of October. And you can register following the link, and you find all our information, all this information and the past seminars as well in our website that Fenella has shared in the chat. I thank you all very much for coming today, for joining. It's brilliant to see so many people coming in and listening to these seminars. And thanks, Jemina, again for delivering this presentation, and to Fenella and Lizzie to help out. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely day.
Thanks to you, Chiara, for chairing, and there's a This is the EDICa, the resource thing that I talked about earlier on, which you can find through our website already. We're already starting to pull that together. So please do take a look. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.